Welcome to Twilight Tale, where forgotten worlds come alive just as the night grows quiet. Tonight, we drift back to the cradle of civilization, to a city of dazzling walls, hanging gardens, and unmatched power. But even the greatest kingdoms can crumble, sometimes softly, sometimes suddenly. As you settle in and let the noise of the day fade away, join me on a journey through ancient Babylon. What really caused this mighty empire to fall? Was it invasion, betrayal, or something far more subtle? Let the past unfold as we gently explore the mystery behind Babylon's fall. What really destroyed the great empire? Now, close your eyes if you wish, breathe deeply, and let the story guide you. There is a place where the land seems to breathe, as though it remembers its past, where the earth, touched by time, hums softly in the evening winds. In the quiet vastness of the desert, beneath the weight of centuries, there once stood a city whose walls whispered with stories. Babylon. The name alone seems to echo through the ages, carrying with it the weight of forgotten glory, of splendor that once rivaled the stars. Imagine, if you will, a distant evening as twilight settles over the endless expanse of sand. The light, soft and fading, caresses the city's towering gates, which shimmer like memories caught between two worlds. The gates of Babylon, gilded and grand, stand open to the endless sky, as if waiting to welcome the past once more. In the distance, the mighty Euphrates winds through the heart of the city, its waters gently lapping at the banks, carrying with them whispers of a time when this river was the lifeblood of an empire. It is said that in the silence of those waters, the echoes of Babylon's past still linger, soft and slow, like a breath held for centuries. Through these ancient gates, we step into the heart of Babylon, a city of unimaginable beauty, a dream in stone and clay. The grand ziggurat rises from the earth, its towering steps reaching toward the heavens, as if touching the very fingers of the gods. The Temple of Marduk, once the sacred center of the city, stands at its base, its walls adorned with the colors of divinity, whispering of rituals performed in the name of the gods who shaped the fortunes of Babylon. It is here, in this sacred place, that the soul of Babylon once lived. It is said that the very air in this temple felt charged with the presence of something eternal, something divine. But as we walk through the ruins, through these still places where once there was life, there is a feeling that something is lost. The air, once thick with the fragrance of incense and the sound of ritual songs, is now still. The gold that once glittered beneath the sun is now muted by the weight of time. In the soft glow of twilight, as the last light of day fades, we are left with a question that has no easy answer. What happened to this place? How did Babylon, once the most magnificent city on earth, fall into ruin? Historians tell us that Babylon was a city of great power, built by the hands of kings whose names are still spoken today. Nebuchadnezzar II, its greatest ruler, carved his name into the fabric of history, constructing temples, palaces, and monuments to Marduk. The Hanging Gardens, too, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world, are said to have flourished here, their cascading greenery a symbol of the harmony between nature and human ingenuity. These images of grandeur are etched into our collective memory, as vivid as the blue tiles that adorned Babylon's gates. Yet, as we trace the history of this great empire, we begin to feel the delicate unraveling of its story. The river, that once flowed with the life of the city, the Euphrates, now seems to move more slowly, carrying with it the weight of time and loss. There is a soft sadness in the realization that Babylon's power, once unmatched, began to fade, not with the roar of battle, but with the quiet erosion of its own greatness. Perhaps it was pride that began the decay. The city, once a beacon of divine favor, began to turn inward. Kings who had once built in the service of the gods now sought only to glorify their own names. Temples and monuments were raised, not as acts of devotion, but as symbols of royal power. The people, once united in reverence for their gods, began to falter in their faith. The sacred rituals that had given Babylon its strength became mere echoes of their former selves, whispered in corners where the light of divine presence no longer reached. Where the grand ziggurat had once soared toward the heavens, now it seemed to bow under the weight of forgotten prayers. Perhaps, too, it was the weariness of empire that set in. The mighty walls of Babylon, so secure and impenetrable, began to feel more like barriers than shields. The empire, once vibrant and flourishing, began to fracture. Wars with neighboring kingdoms, internal strife, and the inevitable rise of new powers began to wear away at Babylon's strength. And then, of course, there was the quiet arrival of Cyrus the Great. In the year 539 BCE, the Persian king marched toward Babylon. But it was not the clash of swords that brought the city to its knees. Instead, it was the quiet flow of the Euphrates that marked the fall. The Persians, it is said, diverted the river, allowing their army to march beneath the walls of the city, and Babylon fell, not with the fury of battle, but with the soft sound of the river's flow. It is whispered that even the last king, Belshazzar, could not have known that his empire was slipping away in the stillness of that night. And so, Babylon, the city of gold and divine favor, was taken not with a roar, but with the gentle, inevitable passing of time. The golden gates, once a symbol of the city's unassailable might, were left to rust in the desert winds. The gardens, once a marvel of beauty, faded into memory. The ziggurat, which had reached toward the heavens, now lies in ruins, its steps scattered by time, its walls cracked and weathered. Perhaps some answers lie only in silence. In forgotten corners of the earth, the remnants of Babylon still lie, waiting to be uncovered. Archaeologists and historians return again and again, turning over the stones, seeking the truth of this ancient place. But in the end, it may be that we are only allowed to glimpse what history allows us to dream. For even the greatest of cities, even Babylon, with its golden gates and towering walls, will one day fade into the whispers of time. The sun has long set over the ruins now, the quiet winds of the desert carrying the stories of Babylon away, as gently as a sigh. There is no great conclusion to this story, no sudden revelation, only the soft rhythm of time, endlessly turning, endlessly moving. Perhaps it is enough to know that the city once existed, a fleeting, radiant dream, where the river met the desert, where the gods were honored, and where, for a time, human hands reached up to touch the stars. And now, as we walk away, the silence of the desert begins to settle over us. The past, it seems, is not a thing we can grasp. It is something that settles, like dust, where we least expect it. It may be that we remember only what history allows us to dream, and perhaps that is all we are meant to know. The golden gates, like all things, have faded into the soft shadow of the night. The city, its secrets held by the earth, rests, its story unfinished, yet ever present in the quiet hum of the desert, where the past meets the present, and where time lingers just beyond reach. In the stillness of the night, when the world beyond the royal palace rests beneath the weight of forgotten centuries, the great King Nebuchadnezzar lies awake. His eyes, darkened by the soft shadows of his chamber, stare into the dimness as though searching for something beyond the veil of his thoughts. The moon, muted in the sky, casts its pale light over the stone walls, and all is silent, except for the gentle rustle of the night winds that slip through the cracks in the palace, whispering secrets older than the kings who built these walls. Here, within this vast, imposing fortress, Nebuchadnezzar wrestles with the haunting remnants of a troubling vision, a dream that lingers like a breath held too long, lingering with no release. It is said that, in that quiet moment, the king's mind wanders through the labyrinth of his empire, through the great temples and ziggurats of Babylon, and the bustling streets where merchants and priests move like the river's current. Yet what haunts him is not the beauty of his empire. No, it is the image of a statue, a figure of such grandeur that even the heavens seemed to take notice. The statue rises before him in his mind's eye, its head of purest gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, and its feet, strange and unsettling, made of a mingling of iron and clay. The vision lingers, twisting through his thoughts like a silent storm. Historians tell us that the dream had been so vivid, so pressing, that Nebuchadnezzar could not ignore its weight. He knew, even as he lay there in the shadows of his royal bed, that this vision, this impossible statue, was a prophecy. Each part of the statue, he understood, symbolized a kingdom that would rise and fall in the great, inevitable dance of time. The golden head, gleaming with the light of Babylon itself, was his kingdom, magnificent, unparalleled, a beacon of culture, power, and divine favor. The silver chest, though less bright, represented the kingdom that would follow, perhaps one built upon the remnants of his own, yet inevitably weaker. The bronze belly, even more distant, seemed to signal a kingdom whose strength would dwindle further still. And the feet, composed of iron and clay, were brittle and unstable, destined to crumble under the weight of history. The king cannot escape the vision. His mind circles it like a moth drawn to flame, each thought heavier than the last. The dream, prophetic yet unclear, gnaws at him as the moon climbs higher in the sky, casting its quiet light through the lattices of the palace. The splendor of his reign, built upon the foundations of gods and stone, feels suddenly fragile. Perhaps the prophecy, like the statue, was a warning, a glimpse of what lay beyond the horizon. Nebuchadnezzar's breath grows shallow, as if the weight of an empire and of destiny itself presses down upon him. We move through the chambers of his palace, where the walls still echo with the steps of his ambition. The halls are lined with stone and adorned with vivid frescoes, their colors faded but still holding the memory of the great victories and grand constructions of his reign. The air smells of incense, mingling with the dust of ancient stones, as though the past has settled here in quiet contemplation. Nebuchadnezzar, great builder of temples and creator of wonders, had poured his spirit into this city. It was here, in this very palace, that he had made his devotion to Marduk, the supreme god of Babylon, tangible. The ziggurat of Etemenanke, which he had raised to reach the heavens, soared above the city like a stairway to the divine. The hanging gardens, though perhaps only a dream to us now, may have been conceived here, nurtured under the king's watchful eye. Yet, even as he gazed upon his creations, even as he looked upon the divine in stone and earth, Nebuchadnezzar must have felt, deep within the corners of his heart, a tension that his empire could not escape. For all his grandeur, all his achievements, he knew, as all great rulers know, that no kingdom lasts forever. And so, beneath the marble floors of his palace, beneath the lavish robes that adorned his body, beneath the weight of his crown, there lingered the question, how could such a mighty empire fall? In the chambers of his palace, we follow the king's troubled soul, tracing the path of his life. As a young prince, Nebuchadnezzar had been groomed for greatness, and his rise to power had been swift and decisive. The city of Babylon flourished under his rule, becoming the jewel of the ancient world. His armies were unmatched, his diplomacy deft, his devotion to Marduk unwavering. But within the very foundations of the empire, perhaps even within the walls of the palace itself, there were murmurs of doubt. There were whispers that even the mightiest walls could one day crack, that even the most formidable armies would, in time, find their match. It was the silence of these doubts that haunted Nebuchadnezzar's soul. Perhaps, as he lay there in the quiet of the night, it was not just the vision of the statue that troubled him, but the inevitability of the empire's decline. Was the great king truly untouchable, or was he, like all rulers before him, merely the fleeting figurehead of a passing age? As we move further through the palace, past its golden columns, and into the sacred inner sanctum, we feel the weight of Babylon's splendor. The city itself, built along the banks of the Euphrates, was a marvel of human ingenuity and divine favor. Its gates, grand and gilded, were said to have been among the most magnificent in the world. The Ishtar Gate, adorned with images of lions and dragons, stood like a silent sentinel, welcoming all who entered this city of the gods. Its very name, Babylon, was said to mean the gate of the gods, and the city lived up to this lofty ideal, rising above the desert as a symbol of everything divine and powerful. But even the most magnificent gate, as Nebuchadnezzar knew, would one day close. Historians tell us that the dream he had was not just of kingdoms, but of something deeper, a vision of the fragility of human achievement, of the delicate balance between creation and destruction. The kings of gold and silver and bronze would rise, only to fall in time, their foundations eroded by the winds of change. The feet of iron and clay, fragile, unstable, would eventually give way, and the great statue would crumble, as would Babylon itself. The king cannot escape the vision. His mind circles it like a moth drawn to flame, each thought heavier than the last. The dream, prophetic yet unclear, gnaws at him as the moon climbs higher in the sky, casting its quiet light through the lattices of the palace. The splendor of his reign, built upon the foundations of gods and stone, feels suddenly fragile. Perhaps the prophecy, like the statue, was a warning, a glimpse of what lay beyond the horizon. Nebuchadnezzar's breath grows shallow, as if the weight of an empire and of destiny itself presses down upon him. We move through the chambers of his palace, where the walls still echo with the steps of his ambition. The halls are lined with stone and adorned with vivid frescoes, their colors faded but still holding the memory of the great victories and grand constructions of his reign. The air smells of incense, mingling with the dust of ancient stones, as though the past has settled here in quiet contemplation. Nebuchadnezzar, great builder of temples and creator of wonders, had poured his spirit into this city. It was here, in this very palace, that he had made his devotion to Marduk, the supreme god of Babylon, tangible. The ziggurat of Etemenanke, which he had raised to reach the heavens, soared above the city like a stairway to the divine. The hanging gardens, though perhaps only a dream to us now, may have been conceived here, nurtured under the king's watchful eye. Yet, even as he gazed upon his creations, even as he looked upon the divine in stone and earth, Nebuchadnezzar must have felt, deep within the corners of his heart, a tension that his empire could not escape. For all his grandeur, all his achievements, he knew, as all great rulers know, that no kingdom lasts forever. And so, beneath the marble floors of his palace, beneath the lavish robes that adorned his body, beneath the weight of his crown, there lingered the question, how could such a mighty empire fall? In the chambers of his palace, we follow the king's troubled soul, tracing the path of his life. As a young prince, Nebuchadnezzar had been groomed for greatness, and his rise to power had been swift and decisive. The city of Babylon flourished under his rule, becoming the jewel of the ancient world. His armies were unmatched, his diplomacy deft, his devotion to Marduk unwavering. But within the very foundations of the empire, perhaps even within the walls of the palace itself, there were murmurs of doubt. There were whispers. The moon, full and quiet, casts its soft glow across the desolate banks of the Euphrates. The river, ancient and unyielding, flows steadily through the heart of the once great city of Babylon. It is said that the Euphrates has carried the stories of the ages, its waters witnessing the rise and fall of empires, the whispers of forgotten kings, the ebb and flow of life itself. In its steady passage, there is a rhythm, a pulse, as though the river itself remembers all that has come before. Beneath the moon's gentle light, the ruins of Babylon stretch out across the desert, their stone walls half swallowed by the sand. What was once a city of towering gates, magnificent palaces, and sacred temples now lies in the quiet embrace of time. The great ziggurat, which once rose toward the heavens like a stairway to the gods, now stands silent, its steps broken and scattered, its purpose lost to the wind. And yet the river remains, flowing, unhurried, as it has for thousands of years. The river, in its infinite patience, has seen it all: the grandeur of Babylon, the fleeting glory of its rulers, and the inevitable silence that follows. Historians tell us that the Euphrates was once the lifeblood of this ancient city, nourishing it as the river of time nourishes all things. It was through this river that Babylon's power was sustained, its fields irrigated, its people fed. The city, cradled by the river's embrace, flourished under the reign of Nebuchadnezzar. Yet, as the years passed, the river itself became a silent witness to the empire's slow unraveling. Though the walls of Babylon stood tall, though the ziggurats still touched the sky, the heart of the city, the very pulse of its civilization, began to slow. And so, as we walk along the banks of the Euphrates in this quiet hour, we can almost hear the soft murmur of the past. In this place, where the river meets the desert, the ebb and flow of Babylon's history are etched into the landscape, like ripples on the water's surface, slowly fading into stillness. It is said that the river holds secrets, the memory of a city that once rose to greatness, now faded into the sands. The city of Babylon, under Nebuchadnezzar's reign, was a marvel of human achievement. It was a place of unparalleled beauty and power, where the gods themselves were said to walk among men. The hanging gardens, though their existence is shrouded in mystery, are thought to have stood here, their lush greenery cascading down from the terraces like a dream woven into the very fabric of the earth. Historians have debated their true form, but the image endures, of gardens that defied the desert, a symbol of Babylon's might and its connection to the divine. The city's great temples, especially the Temple of Marduk, were adorned with golden statues and intricate carvings that reflected the grandeur of a civilization in its prime. Nebuchadnezzar himself, believed to have been divinely chosen, built these monuments in the name of the gods, ensuring that Babylon's legacy would be eternal. Yet, beneath the grandeur, there were whispers, soft, uncertain voices that spoke of an empire whose foundations were beginning to crack. Was it pride that led to Babylon's decline? Or was it simply the weight of time, the slow, inevitable decay that accompanies all things, even the greatest of cities? Perhaps, in the quiet corners of Babylon, as the river flowed by, the people began to sense the shifting currents of their world. Though the walls of the city were as mighty as ever, there were signs, faint but present, that all was not well. The king, so steadfast in his devotion to Marduk, may have felt the tension between the divine favor he had once felt and the shadow of uncertainty that loomed over him. Perhaps it was during the quiet hours of the night, as Nebuchadnezzar lay awake, that he felt the weight of this unseen force, a force that even the great river could not wash away. Perhaps he understood, deep within, that Babylon, like all things, was impermanent. The statue from his dream, the golden head, the silver chest, the bronze belly, and the feet of iron and clay, was not just a symbol of kingdoms to come. It was a reflection of the inevitable decline of all empires. Even the mighty Babylon, he must have known, would one day fade into the sands. As we stand at the edge of the Euphrates, the silence of the past surrounds us. We listen not for the sounds of battle or the clamor of a fallen city, but for something deeper. The river, though silent in its flow, holds the echoes of what once was. The grandeur of Babylon, with all its splendor, seems distant now, a dream suspended in the gentle currents of time. Yet there is still a softness to it all, a sense of reverence for the city that once was, for the kings and priests who devoted their lives to it, for the people who lived and loved in its shadow. It is said that the river never forgets. It remembers all that it has carried along its banks, the dreams, the struggles, the triumphs, and the losses. In the quiet flow of the Euphrates, there is a sacredness, a reverence for the passage of time that cannot be erased. The river does not mourn the fall of Babylon. It simply moves forward, carrying the stories of the past with it, allowing them to fade as softly as the ripples on its surface. Perhaps, in some way, the river holds the key to understanding the quiet demise of Babylon. It did not come with the fury of battle or the cries of a nation in revolt. No, Babylon's fall was more subtle, more inevitable, like the slow erosion of a cliff by the gentle lapping of the sea. And just as the Euphrates moves quietly through the ruins of the city, so too did the empire fade into history, carried away by the steady rhythm of time. The city, that had once been the envy of the ancient world, now rests in quiet solitude, its ruins a testament to the delicate balance between creation and decay. As we stand beside the river, we are left with a lingering sense of wonder. How does a civilization so grand, so full of life and hope, fade into the past? Perhaps the answers lie not in the pages of history, but in the whispers of the river itself, in the soft flow of time that carries all things forward, regardless of their grandeur or their fall. The river remembers, yes, but it does not hold on. It simply moves, quietly, patiently, as all things must. Perhaps some answers lie only in silence. In forgotten corners of the earth, the remains of Babylon still rest, waiting for those who listen softly, who approach with reverence for the past. The ruins of the city, now swallowed by the desert, hold their secrets close. The Euphrates, ever flowing, continues its journey, carrying with it the stories of an empire long gone, its pulse fading with every passing day. And so, as we leave the river, as the moon continues its journey across the sky, the stillness of the night settles over us, and we are reminded that time moves on, whether we are ready or not. Perhaps the past returns only to those who listen gently. Perhaps the river knows things we can never fully understand, its currents forever carrying the dreams and the ruins of civilizations past. But for now, we walk away quietly, as the river flows on, carrying with it the memory of Babylon. In the quiet expanse of the desert, beneath the vast dome of the sky, there is an ancient silence that has lingered for centuries. The sands, once bustling with the energy of kings, armies, and empires, now lie still, untouched, yet heavy with memory. And through this stillness there echoes a story, a soft murmur of a king whose name is still spoken in reverence today. Cyrus the Great, the founder of the Persian Empire, whose chariot once rolled toward the gates of Babylon, altering the course of history with a quiet, almost invisible shift. Imagine the moment, the sky fading into twilight, and the cool desert winds carrying the faintest rustle of the earth beneath the weight of an army. As the Euphrates winds lazily through the land, there comes the distant sound of hooves, soft but steady, as the Persian king, Cyrus, leads his forces to the very heart of Babylon. The great walls, which had once seemed so unassailable, rise in the distance like the shadow of a forgotten dream, their majesty no longer enough to hold back the inevitable tide of time. The chariot of Cyrus, a symbol of strength, of an empire still in its rise, rolls quietly over the land. No great clash of swords, no battle cries to shake the air, just the steady rhythm of hooves, the soft thud of the earth beneath wheels that would soon turn the page of Babylon's history. Historians tell us that when Cyrus, with his army of Persians, Medes, and other allied forces, approached Babylon in 539 BCE, it was not with the roar of war, but with an unexpected calm. For all its power, Babylon had grown fragile, its once proud gates no longer a true defense against the changing currents of history. The city was powerful, yes, rich with culture, with monumental works of art and architecture, with an ancient devotion to the gods. Yet, in the end, it was not the walls of Babylon that would determine its fate, but the quiet strategy of a man who knew how to lead, not with force, but with subtlety. And so it was that Cyrus, with a brilliance so understated it almost seemed peaceful, turned the course of his river, the mighty Euphrates, against Babylon itself. It is said that he diverted the waters, creating a passage beneath the walls of the city. Without the great river's protection, the gates of Babylon stood open, not through brute strength, but through the patience and wisdom of a king who knew when to act and when to let time unfold. The very essence of this moment, the quiet movement of the Persian army, unseen by Babylon's defenders, seemed almost like the river itself, flowing, inevitable, and yet so soft in its approach. As we stand on the banks of the Euphrates, the desert around us stretches into infinity, and we are drawn into the vastness of the moment when Babylon fell, not with the thunder of armies clashing, but with the gentle movement of a river, a quiet shifting of history. Perhaps it is here, in the stillness of the land, that we find the true measure of Cyrus's greatness. He did not conquer with the fury of a tempest. Instead, he moved with the soft, steady rhythm of the river, the quiet force that reshapes the earth in ways unseen, felt only after time has passed. Cyrus, with his wisdom and his diplomacy, entered Babylon without the bloodshed that had often accompanied the fall of other great cities. His entrance into the city, some say, was welcomed, not resisted, a peaceful surrender to the inevitable forces of change. The city's king, Belshazzar, the last of Babylon's rulers, did not know what was coming. Some records tell us that he was feasting when the Persians made their way into the city, the festivities of the palace masking the quiet storm that was taking place beyond the walls. Babylon, so secure in its might, never truly believed it could fall. But fall it did, not with a mighty crash, but with the soft flutter of change whispered across the desert sands. The story of Cyrus is often told through the lens of his military conquests, of the vast empire he built, stretching from the lands of the Medes to the heart of Mesopotamia and beyond. But there is a quiet grace to his legacy, a softness that runs through his story like the slow flow of the river he once commanded. It is said that he was not a ruler who sought the destruction of those he conquered. Rather, he is remembered for his respect for the customs, religions, and cultures of the people he governed. In Babylon, for instance, the people were allowed to continue their worship of Marduk and other gods, a gesture of diplomacy and respect that was rare in the ancient world. The chariot of Cyrus, in its quiet passage, leaves behind not only a physical legacy, but a symbolic one. His actions, his patient, strategic conquest of Babylon, represent something beyond mere military triumph. It is the quiet force of a ruler who understood the value of knowing when to act and when to wait. Like the river, which carves through mountains slowly, imperceptibly, Cyrus shaped the course of history with a gentleness that belied his strength. As we walk along the now silent banks of the Euphrates, the moonlight spilling gently over the water, we reflect on the power of such quiet acts. The fall of Babylon, the end of its reign, was not the result of a great battle or a violent clash of armies. It was the result of a single, subtle act, a king's decision to turn the river, to take advantage of the inevitable flow of time and history. The chariot of Cyrus, rolling steadily toward the gates of the city, becomes a symbol not only of military strategy, but of the quiet, almost meditative forces that shape the course of empires. In this stillness, as the river flows quietly past, we are reminded of the delicate balance between strength and wisdom, between power and patience. It is said that empires rise and fall in cycles, like the ebb and flow of the river. Some, like Babylon, fall with a loud crash, their foundations weakened by their own pride. Others, like Persia, rise not through overwhelming force, but through the quiet knowledge of when to act and when to let time pass. Perhaps the true greatness of Cyrus lies not in the cities he conquered, nor the empire he built, but in the way he moved through the world, softly, surely, with the understanding that sometimes the greatest power lies not in what is taken, but in what is allowed to unfold. As we leave the river behind and look out across the vast, silent desert, we are left with the soft echo of a distant time. The chariot of Cyrus has long since moved on, but the ripples of his actions continue to flow through history, just as the Euphrates continues its steady passage across the land. In the quiet, we sense the timelessness of this moment, the way empires rise and fall, not in the fury of battle, but in the quiet inevitability of change. Perhaps some answers lie only in silence. Perhaps the story of Cyrus, like the river, is not one of loud triumph, but of quiet understanding, an understanding that, like the chariot, moves forward, steady and unhurried, until it becomes a part of the eternal flow of history. In the quiet, the world seems to hold its breath, as if waiting for something, waiting for the moment when the past will speak again. And it does, softly, in the delicate whispers of the wind that stir the dust, or perhaps in the silence between each breath we take. Beneath the vast moonlit sky, we stand before a relic of Babylon's greatness, the Ishtar Gate, which once stood as an imposing entryway into the city. Though the grand structure has crumbled, and the blue-glazed bricks, once vibrant, now lie scattered and faded, there is still something alive in the air, something that speaks of what once was. Historians tell us that the Ishtar Gate was one of the most magnificent achievements of Nebuchadnezzar II, an emperor who sought to make Babylon the most splendid city the world had ever seen. Its walls, adorned with reliefs of animals, lions, dragons, and bulls, were once the color of the sky itself, deep blue, as if the heavens themselves had taken root in the heart of Babylon. It was said that the gate, with its towering arches, was a portal not only to the city, but to something more sacred, to the divine power of the gods who watched over the land. The very entrance to Babylon seemed to promise that all who entered would be stepping into a realm of beauty and power, a place where mortal hands had touched the sacred. But now, as we stand before the ruins of the gate, the images of lions and dragons seem distant, fading into the soft murmur of the desert winds. The once imposing walls, now reduced to fragments, seem to exhale the heavy silence of time. The past lingers here, not in loud declarations, but in soft echoes, traces of what was once so vital and alive. There is a stillness, a quiet reverence in this place. The gate, though broken, still holds something of the divine in its remnants. Perhaps it is in the way the wind passes through the cracks in the stone, whispering the names of those who once walked beneath its arches. Perhaps it is in the way the moonlight reflects off the fragments of blue tiles, each piece a memory, scattered across the sands like forgotten dreams. The Ishtar Gate, historians tell us, was more than just an entrance. It was an expression of Babylon's devotion to the gods, particularly to Ishtar, the goddess of love and war. The reliefs of animals, the mighty lion, the fierce dragon, the regal bull, were not merely decorative. They were symbols of the divine forces that shaped Babylon's world. Each figure represented a different aspect of Ishtar's power. The lion was her strength, the bull her fertility, and the dragon her authority. As travelers entered the city, they were not simply passing through a physical gate, but through a threshold that connected the mortal world with the divine. Yet, even in this sacred space, there is a sense of quiet decay. The tiles, once a brilliant blue, have faded over time, their edges softened by the touch of countless hands. The reliefs, which once stood as mighty symbols of divine power, are now broken and worn, their details no longer sharp, but softened by the passage of centuries. There is something sacred in this fading, something that speaks of the inevitable erosion of all things, even the greatest of cities, even the most sacred of places. As we walk slowly around the ruins of the Ishtar Gate, the soft crunch of our footsteps in the sand is the only sound that fills the air. In the stillness, the weight of Babylon's past seems to settle around us. This was a city that once inspired awe, a place where the divine and the earthly were intertwined, where every stone was imbued with meaning. And now, as we stand among the ruins, we are left with the question, what remains when the stones crumble, when the gods fade into silence? Perhaps it is in the quietness of the gate's remnants that we find the answer. For in the silence, there is reverence. In the ruins, there is a soft, sacred beauty that is untouched by time. The Ishtar Gate may no longer stand as it once did, but in the stillness, it speaks to us of something timeless, the transience of all things, and the quiet dignity that comes with knowing that nothing, not even the greatest of cities, can withstand the passage of time. As we stand in the shadow of the gate, the moon rising higher in the sky, we are reminded that all things, whether kingdoms, gods, or people, will one day fade into the quiet embrace of history. The Ishtar Gate, like the city it once adorned, will one day be no more than a memory, a fragment of a story whispered through the sands of time. But perhaps in the soft murmur of the wind, we can hear the faint echoes of those who once walked beneath its arches. Perhaps the gate itself, in its silent decay, still carries the spirit of Babylon, a city that dreamed, that created, that believed in the power of the divine. And in that silence, in the quiet presence of what remains, we are invited to listen. For the past returns not in grand declarations, but in whispers, in the soft, lingering traces that time leaves behind. Perhaps some answers lie only in silence. In forgotten corners of the earth, where the remnants of ancient civilizations rest, there are stories waiting to be uncovered. The Ishtar Gate is but one such story, one fragment of the grand narrative of Babylon. Yet, even in its broken state, it holds something sacred, a reminder that the greatness of a civilization is not defined by the permanence of its monuments, but by the fleeting moments in which its people reached for the divine. As we leave the ruins of the gate behind, the desert once again falls into stillness. The moon casts its soft light over the city's remnants, and the whisper of the wind carries the past forward, softly, gently, as it has done for millennia. The gate may be gone, but the spirit of Babylon, like the river, like the fading light, remains, held softly in the dust of time. And perhaps, in the quiet hum of the night, we understand that the past does not have to be loud to be felt. The whispers of history, like the wind through the ruins, carry with them the stories of what once was, gently, reminding us that even in the silence there is something sacred. It is night in Babylon. The lamps along the walls burn with a steady amber glow, small pools of light trembling in the warm darkness. Above them, the sky spreads out like a great, dark canopy, the stars faint behind a slight haze of desert dust. The city's famous walls, thick and towering, stretch away into the distance, enclosing streets that have begun to quiet for the night. The Euphrates moves slowly through the heart of the city, its surface catching fragments of lamplight and stars, a black ribbon woven through stone and clay. From the ramparts, a watchman leans on his spear and listens. He hears the familiar sounds of Babylon's night, the distant clink of pottery, the quiet murmur of late voices, a snatch of music carried from some inner courtyard. Somewhere, a dog barks once, then falls silent. The river sighs softly against its banks. To anyone standing on these walls, this night would seem like so many others, a great city exhaling after the heat and dust of the day, cradled in its own sense of security. Historians tell us that in the autumn of 539 BCE, Babylon still believed in its own strength. Its walls were said to be immense, its gates strong, its storehouses full. The city had survived storms of war before. Behind the defenses, people trusted in the protective shadow of their gods and the memory of kings who had once made Babylon the envy of the world. Yet, beyond the reach of the lamplight, in the darkness stretching away from the walls, something had shifted. The world outside the city had changed, and that change was drawing quietly closer. Far upstream, the Euphrates flows through open country. It passes by fields and canals, through lands that no longer answer to Babylon's kings. The river has felt the march of new armies along its banks. It has watched standards bearing the emblem of Persia move steadily westward. Cyrus the Great, the king whose name now travels in murmurs from marketplace to marketplace, has already defeated armies that once shielded Babylon's borders. The Battle of Opis, historians tell us, ended in a crushing defeat for the Babylonian forces. Sippar surrendered without a fight. The outer lines of defense have folded like reeds bent by the wind. But here, tonight, within the walls, the city does not tremble. In the palaces, lamps glow brighter than in the streets. It is said that the court is gathered, nobles, administrators, priests, those who have tied their fortunes to this ancient center of power. Some later traditions speak of feasting, of cups raised under the painted ceilings, of music playing while the night deepens. Perhaps there is a sense of denial in the air, a refusal to believe that the great river of history could ever flow against Babylon. The king, Nebuchadnezzar, is not here. He has been absent often, dwelling for long periods in a distant oasis city, devoted to a god that many in Babylon do not place at the center of their world. In the capital, his son Belshazzar has carried the weight of rule. Power, once so clear and unquestioned, has grown diffuse, its center uncertain. In forgotten corners of the city, voices have wondered whether the gods are as pleased with their rulers as they once were. The lamplight wavers on the river. Herodotus, the Greek historian who heard the tale many years later, tells us a story in flowing, careful words. He says that the Persians did not storm the walls of Babylon. Instead, they turned to the river itself. By diverting the Euphrates into channels and marshes, they lowered its level enough that soldiers could wait along its bed, moving beneath the shadow of the walls and through the river gates that were carelessly left unbarred. It is a story told so often that it feels like memory. We are invited to imagine the scene. While the city sleeps, a portion of the river slips away into newly cut canals. The water in Babylon's heart grows shallow, the currents slow, the dark surface retreats from the stone embankments. Somewhere along the riverfront, heavy gates that should be locked remain open in the warm night air. A few guards linger by the water, tired, lulled by routine. Beyond them, in the darkness, shapes move slowly forward, the silhouettes of Persian soldiers, their armor dark against the dim starlight, feet sinking quietly into the riverbed's mud. Cuneiform tablets, written by Babylonian scribes soon after these events, speak more briefly, more quietly. The Nabonidus Chronicle, as modern historians call it, states that on a certain night, the army of Cyrus entered Babylon without battle. Just a few words pressed into clay, carrying the weight of a world overturned. No clamor, no drama, just a simple record. The city was taken, and the old rule ended. Between these two accounts, the Greeks' detailed river tale and the Babylonians' brief note, lies a calm uncertainty, a space where imagination and evidence drift together like silt in the current. So we stand, in thought, upon the riverbank in that long-ago night. The lamps flicker, the water glides past, lower than usual, its surface whispering against the stone. The voices from the palace seem very far away. Somewhere along the currents, men are moving, their presence almost indistinguishable from the dark. There is no roar of assault, no exploding storm, just the soft, almost inaudible shift of power crossing an invisible boundary. Inside the city, most people sleep. In narrow houses along winding streets, families who have known only Babylon's rule dream beneath reed mats and clay roofs. They are farmers, potters, scribes, merchants. The shape of the empire above them is as distant and intangible as the stars beyond the city's haze. For them, the night is simply night, another pause between days of work and worship, of bargaining and prayer. They do not yet know that by morning, the name of their king will be spoken in a different tense, that the prayers whispered in temples will be offered under the watchful eye of a new ruler. It is said that Cyrus did not destroy Babylon. When the gates were taken, there was no great sack, no burning of temples, no ravaging of the streets. The city, that jewel of the Euphrates, was too valuable, not simply as stone and brick, but as a living heart of trade, ritual, and memory. The Cyrus cylinder, a small clay document inscribed in Akkadian cuneiform, presents the Persian king as chosen by Babylon's chief god, Marduk, to restore justice and order after the perceived failings of Nabonidus. Whether this is royal propaganda, religious interpretation, or both, it suggests something about the mood that followed the city's quiet capture. We can imagine, in the days that followed, a strange mixture of fear and relief. The soldiers of Persia walk through the markets, but the stalls still open. The river still brings boats loaded with grain and goods. The great temple towers still throw long shadows across the courtyards. Life, which had always been tied to the river's flow and the turning of seasons, continues. Some officials swear loyalty to the new ruler. Some are replaced or disappear. Scribes begin to write a different royal name on their tablets. The shape of rule changes, but the city's breath does not cease. And yet, for Babylon as an empire, this night is a boundary. Before it, the city stands at the center of its own world, rich in history and self-assurance. After it, Babylon becomes a province in a larger realm, Still important, still full of ritual and trade, but no longer the sovereign hearts of everything. Power has slipped, gently but irreversibly, into new hands. Where the past settles like dust, we see not a single instant of catastrophe, but a series of almost imperceptible shifts. The long reign of Nebuchadnezzar II had ended years before, leaving behind avenues of bricks stamped with his name, temples rebuilt in shining glory, and perhaps a sense that Babylon's greatness was something unassailable. But kings come and go, administrations falter, religious policies alienate priests and people, allies drift away, armies lose battles. In the silence between these events, a kind of fatigue takes root, the slow weariness of an empire that has grown used to its own reflection. The fall of Babylon, historians tell us, was the result of many such currents meeting in one quiet night. Internal discontent, external pressure, military defeat beyond the city, and a rival whose power had been carefully, patiently built. Cyrus did not shatter Babylon. He stepped into a doorway that had long been loosening on its hinges. The drama, if there is one, lies not in the noise of that night, but in the long accumulation of smaller moments that led toward it. Forgotten decisions, overlooked warnings, subtle changes in worship and loyalty. And so, in the middle of the night, the city slept. The walls stood as they always had. The river flowed, a little lower, but still moving on. Yet, when dawn came, Babylon woke beneath a new sky, under a different shadow of power. The change, in a high chamber of Babylon, deep within the royal palace, the night is warm and still. Oil lamps flicker along the walls, their flames small and steady, casting soft halos of gold over plaster and brick. Shadows drift gently in the corridors, lengthening and shrinking with each wavering light. Outside, the city rests beneath its great walls. The Euphrates breathes in the darkness, flowing past sleeping houses and silent courtyards. But here, in this hall, the night is not yet finished. It is said that Belshazzar, son of Nabonidus, sits among his nobles at a banquet. The sound is not wild, not frantic, but layered and low. A murmur of voices, the muted clink of vessels, the occasional rise of laughter that fades quickly into the heavy air. Musicians play softly in the background. The scents of wine and incense float lazily beneath the carved ceiling. The lamps cast their glow upon a broad wall of smooth plaster, pale against the dim hall, a blank, waiting surface that reflects the golden light like still water. For a moment, there is no sense that anything is ending. Historians tell us that Belshazzar was not truly the supreme king of Babylon, but a crown prince, a co-ruler, entrusted with the city while his father, Nabonidus, spent long years away in the oasis city of Timah. Power, in those final days, did not rest on one clear pair of shoulders. It was dispersed, stretched thin between king and prince, between temples and armies, between the old order and the shifting world beyond the walls. Outside this hall, the empire has already begun to unwind. The army of Cyrus the Great has defeated Babylonian forces at Opis. Sippar has yielded. On clay tablets, scribes have quietly pressed the news into wet clay, the stylus cutting sharp lines that tell of defeat. The Nabonidus Chronicle, as we now call it, preserves these moments in steady, unemotional script. Yet here, in Belshazzar's hall, warm lamplight and strong wine soften the edges of reality. The city's great walls still stand, the stores are full, the river passes faithfully under the protective shadow of its towers. In this room, the sense of danger feels distant, like thunder far away. It is in such a moment, the old story says, that something changes. The Hebrew scriptures, in the book of Daniel, preserve a memory, or perhaps a symbol, of this night. They speak of sacred vessels taken long ago from the temple in Jerusalem when Babylon's armies carried away treasures and people alike. They describe how these vessels, once used in rituals to honor the God of Israel, are brought out for the king's feast, filled now with wine, lifted in praise of other gods, gods of gold and silver, of bronze and iron, of wood and stone. Whether this detail occurred exactly as written, historians cannot say. Yet the image glows in the imagination like lamplight on metal, the quiet mingling of old losses and present pride, of objects taken in conquest being used in careless celebration. The music continues, the conversation flows, and then, in the story that has been told and retold for centuries, the hall grows still. Eyes turn toward the great plastered wall. A hand, it is said, not a whole figure, not a voice, only a hand, appears as if from nowhere and begins to write upon the smooth surface. No wind rises, no lamp is extinguished. There is only the scratch of invisible fingers tracing letters into the reflective lamplight wall. We do not need to decide, here in the quiet of our own night, whether this happened as described. We might simply listen to the way the story has settled into the memory of the ancient world, a story of a king, a hall, a wall, and words that could not be ignored. The writing is brief, 4 words in an Aramaic script familiar to the scholars of the time, yet somehow closed to understanding. The sound in the hall changes. Laughter disappears. The music falters. Goblets are lowered, set aside without a thought. The lamps burn as before, but the room has grown colder. Belshazzar's face, the old account says, turns pale. His thoughts trouble him. His knees tremble. He calls for the wise men. We can imagine them entering, one by one, men accustomed to questions of omens and dreams, of signs in the sky and strange occurrences on earth. They are the learned ones, astrologers, scribes, diviners, entrusted with the task of reading the world's secrets. They look up at the wall, at the dark, fresh letters glistening on the plaster in the lamplight. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. Numbered, weighed, divided. On clay tablets and carved stones, Babylon's language appears across the centuries in careful wedges of cuneiform. Here, in the biblical telling, the words are written in another script, but still they belong to this region, this world, this moment. The king's wise men see the characters, but meaning lies just beyond their grasp, like a faint echo heard but not understood. No one can explain. In the story, it is then that another figure is called, an exile from Judah, known as Daniel, a man who, the tradition says, has already lived long in Babylon, who has seen kings rise and fall, whose life spans most of the city's late glory. He is described as a dream interpreter, a reader of riddles, a man in whom the spirit of the holy gods dwells, though historians today see him more as a figure of memory and faith than a court official whose every step can be traced. He enters the hall, walks under the lamplight, stands before the wall where the words linger. Mene, mene, tekel, upharsin. Gently, the story allows him to speak what others cannot. Mene, your days are numbered. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Perez, your kingdom is divided and given to another people. In this interpretation, we hear not only a moral judgment, but the quiet echo of events already unfolding beyond the walls. The empire's days have indeed been counted. Its strength has been weighed in battle and found insufficient. Its territories are already slipping away, their loyalty divided like a garment torn along old seams. Daniel's words in the narrative crystallize what history itself already whispers. Outside the palace, the night moves on. Somewhere beyond the walls, Persian forces continue their slow, deliberate work.
whether they are, at this very moment, diverting the waters of the Euphrates, as Herodotus would later describe, or simply waiting for the right moment to enter, we do not know. The ancient sources are fragmentary, their lines broken, their accounts partial and colored by perspective. Yet together, they suggest a convergence, a great city near the end of its power, a ruler whose position rests more on titles than on solid ground, an army at the gates, a world ready to turn its page. The handwriting on the wall becomes, across time, more than a single moment. It becomes a symbol of that quiet instant when the inevitable is finally named. In the hall, Belshazzar listens. In the text, he clothes Daniel in purple and places a chain of gold around his neck, as if reward could alter the weight of the words. But the interpretation has already settled into the air like fine dust. The moment cannot be undone. Whether we read this as literal memory or as a story shaped after the fact, it reflects a truth the ancients knew well. There comes a time when the length of a kingdom's days can no longer be stretched, when the scales of fortune have tipped too far to be balanced, when division has already taken root in the body of the state. The lamps burn lower. The music does not begin again. The hall, which moments before rang with the comfort of routine, gold vessels, familiar faces, patterns of rank and privilege, now feels like a chamber suspended over a deep, invisible current. The words on the wall, so small, so few, have altered the space more completely than an army at the doors. Historians tell us that Babylon fell that same season. The Nabonidus Chronicle, in its careful, laconic script, states that, in the month of Tashritu, when Cyrus attacked Babylon, the army entered Babylon without a battle. It names the day, describes the transition, and moves on. No mention of a feast, no mention of a wall. Just the simple, unadorned note of a king's arrival and the end of another's rule. Between these two records, the austere chronicle and the vivid biblical story, lies a wide, quiet plain. Across it moves the sense of inevitability. The prophecy of the handwriting on the wall may not be a report in the modern sense, but it carries the emotional truth of a collapsing world. It preserves the feeling that must have hung over many in those years, that the foundations were no longer secure, that the gods' favor was uncertain, that the days of Babylonian supremacy had reached a natural, unavoidable limit. The hall is empty now. The word-filled wall, if it ever bore those marks outside the story, has long since been washed smooth by time.
In the soft hush of evening, when the last light withdraws from the bricks of Babylon and the sky deepens into a gentle violet, there is a place the mind returns to like a half-remembered dream. It is not a gate, nor a temple, nor a tower that pierces the clouds. It is a garden. Imagine for a moment a height of stone rising above the city's streets, not crowned with battlements or idols, but with leaves. Terraces stepping upward like the slopes of a distant hill, vines spilling over edges, trees planted in deep, hidden beds of soil. Water, the most precious of all things in this dry land, drawn up from the river and sent to wander through channels and basins, flowing over stone into pools where the air is cooler, the light softer, the world quieter. It is said that here, above the dust and heat of Babylon, there were once shadows not of walls, but of branches, the rustle of palm and cypress, the fragrance of damp earth, the sound of water falling in slow, deliberate veils, a garden that seemed to hang in the air, suspended between earth and sky. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon. Their name drifts through history like the scent of something that has long since disappeared. Historians tell us that no Babylonian text, no surviving inscription in Nebuchadnezzar's own voice has yet spoken clearly of this place. The gardens that people imagine, the tiered terraces and winding waterworks, come to us primarily from later Greek and Roman writers, who gathered stories from travelers and interpreters. Diodorus of Sicily, Strabo, and others wrote of a garden built by a great Mesopotamian king, a marvel that rose above the plain, so lush that it seemed a fragment of some greener world set down amid the desert's monotone. One tradition, repeated again and again, whispers of love at the root of this creation. It is said that Nebuchadnezzar II, the king whose bricks rebuilt the walls and temples of Babylon, took a wife from the Median mountains, a queen named Amidis, who came from lands where the hills rolled green beneath cool, familiar rains. When she arrived in Babylon, with its heat and its flat, endless horizon, she is said to have longed for her distant home, for the slopes where trees clung to the earth and the air smelled of pine and wild grasses. To ease her heart, the story says, the king ordered a mountain made. He could not move her birthland nor carry its hills to the banks of the Euphrates, but he could command stone and labor, water and design. Terraces were raised, built upon vaulted foundations, supported by great arches of brick. The flat, baked land was taught to rise step by step into something that resembled a hill. Deep within these terraces, rooms and corridors may have hidden, cool and shaded, while above them soil was laid and anchored with walls and retaining stones. Upon this artificial slope, gardeners planted trees whose roots pressed down into beds of earth, whose branches lifted toward the sky. Fruit trees heavy with sweetness, shade trees casting cool patterns upon the stone, creepers trailing along the edges, flowers blooming briefly in the heat, then fading, leaving their seeds in the soil for a new season to come. Water, drawn up from the river below by unseen mechanisms, perhaps shadows, perhaps chain pumps, was coaxed to climb alongside this green construction. It flowed through clay pipes and stone channels, spread along narrow troughs, and gathered in quiet, waiting pools. In a city of brick and glare, this garden would have seemed like a doorway into another world. So the story says. And whether the details are precise or softened by distance and retelling, the image remains. A queen who missed her hills, a king who answered that longing not with words alone, but with an entire landscape lifted into the air. Yet, as we walk among the ruins of Babylon today, we do not find a mountain of stone and earth rising from the dust. Archaeologists working beneath the sun in the late 19th and early 20th centuries traced the foundations of palaces, walls, and temples. Robert Coldaway, one of the most patient among them, believed he had discovered the base of the famous gardens, a curious series of vaulted chambers and thick foundations near the royal palace. For a time, many accepted his interpretation. It seemed that the dream had found its stone. In later years, other scholars grew less certain. The vaults may have belonged to something else. No irrigation system, unmistakable and grand, was found to match the ancient descriptions. No inscription stood up from the earth to say, in the king's own words, "Here are the gardens that I built." In the 20th century, a new whisper joined the old. Some historians, studying the texts more closely, began to wonder whether the gardens truly belonged to Babylon at all. They noted that the single most detailed description we have came from a writer who may have confused cities and kings, blending memories of one place into another. The Assyrian capital of Nineveh, far to the north, under the rule of Sennacherib, also claimed water-lifting marvels and vast pleasure gardens. One scholar suggested that what the Greeks later called the Hanging Gardens of Babylon were actually these northern gardens of Nineveh, misattributed by distance and time. And so the gardens drift again, from certainty into uncertainty, from map to margin,
from earth to air. Where the past settles like dust, the Hanging Gardens exist not as a clearly marked ruin, but as a question cradled in memory. Did they rise from the banks of the Euphrates, shadowing the streets of Babylon with their leaf-laden terraces? Did they stand instead above the Tigris, farther north, under another king's gaze? Or were they perhaps an ideal that grew in the minds of storytellers, a composite of real gardens, real feats of engineering, and the deep human longing for green places in a dry world? It is said that sometimes history leaves us not with answers, but with shapes in the mist. And yet, even if we cannot point to a precise patch of earth and say, here, we can still listen to what the idea of the gardens tells us about Babylon's world. This was a civilization that understood water as both necessity and wonder. The same people who cut canals from the Euphrates, who measured fields by the flow of irrigation, also knew how to coax water upward against its own tendency to feed something made not for survival alone, but for beauty. Terraced gardens, whether in Babylon or Nineveh, required steady labor and ceaseless care, systems of lifting, channeling, and draining, hands tending roots and branches, eyes watching for the slightest imbalance that might destroy the delicate harmony of stone, soil, and water. To sustain such a place required resources, administration, and peace. When empires prosper, there is time to raise green mountains over clay plains. When kings feel secure, they can afford to create spaces of shade and perfume where the privileged may wander, hearts lightened by the rustle of leaves and the shimmer of water. The existence, or even the persistent story of such gardens, is itself a sign of a world confident in its own endurance. But no garden escapes time. Even if every detail of the legend were true, even if we could stand now beneath the overhang of its highest terrace and feel droplets of water on our skin, the garden that Nebuchadnezzar or Sennacherib once knew would long ago have dissolved. First, the small, almost unnoticed changes. A pump that fails and is not mended quickly. A channel silted with fine particles from the river. A gardener dismissed, another assigned to more urgent duties. A war that draws laborers to the walls, leaving vines untrimmed and basins uncleared. As rule passes from one king to another, as empires are folded into larger empires, priorities shift. What was once the beating heart of a monarchy's pride becomes a costly burden. Water is needed for fields, not hanging shadows. Brick and stone are needed for fortifications, not pleasure terraces. Administrators who once took pride in balancing the needs of a garden and a city begin to write other lists, sign other orders. The garden still breathes, but more shallowly. A tree dies, its roots starved of moisture. No one replaces it. A terrace, once entirely shaded, grows a bare patch where the sun eats at the stone. Soil dries and loosens, trickling away in wind and rain. A carved relief of leaves on the supporting wall softens, its edges blurred. The sound of water, once constant, becomes intermittent, present on some days, absent on others. Then,
dawn comes slowly to Babylon. Before the sun breaks over the horizon, the city lies in a muted half-light, a pale blue wash that softens the shapes of ruins and riverbanks. Shadows stretch long and gentle across the old foundations. The Euphrates, quiet in the morning calm, reflects the growing light in faint, trembling strokes. And at the heart of this stillness, where once stood the sacred center of the empire, we find the remains of a temple, a place that once thrummed with ritual, music, incense, and the steady breath of devotion. This was the Esagila, the great temple of Marduk, the chief god of Babylon. Little remains now. The temple is gone, its walls collapsed into time-smoothed mounds of dust, its courtyards swallowed by the earth. But in the silence, if one stands very still, one can imagine the faint echo of ancient footsteps, the measured tread of priests walking through halls now empty, the rustle of robes passing under lintels long since fallen, the low, rhythmic murmur of prayers rising like smoke into the dimness above. It is said that when Babylon flourished, this temple was its spiritual anchor, the axis around which the city revolved. The god Marduk, warrior, creator, judge, presided over Babylon in the minds of its people. Kings claimed their right to rule through his favor. Festivals honored his power. Inscriptions, pressed into clay by nimble hands, spoke of his might and benevolence. And at the center of it all, rising beside the Esagila, stood the Etamenananki ziggurat, the towering structure that many once believed to be the inspiration for the biblical Tower of Babel, a stairway of brick stretching upward toward the heavens, where gods and humans might meet. Now the tower is only a memory, the temple only a hollow impression on the earth. But let us linger here, in the early light, and revisit what once filled this sacred space. Historians tell us that Nebuchadnezzar II, whose name lies stamped on millions of bricks, lavished special care on the Esagila. He rebuilt its chambers with grand precision, adorned its sanctuaries with gold, and ensured that the rituals performed within its walls were carried out with the utmost reverence. In his inscriptions, he refers to Marduk as the one who granted him kingship, the divine protector who guided his hand as he expanded and beautified Babylon. Inside the Esagila, priests tended to sacred fires, sang hymns in ancient tongues, and carried offerings to the inner sanctum. There, in the holiest chamber, stood the statue of Marduk, a figure of wood overlaid with gold, dressed in fine garments, and adorned with precious stones. It was not the statue alone that commanded respect, but the presence it symbolized, the idea of divine order, of favor, of destiny, intertwined with the life of the city. During the New Year festival, the Akitu, the statue of Marduk was carried in solemn procession from the temple to a distant ceremonial house outside the city. The king himself participated in the rituals. In one of the most striking moments, the high priest would remove the king's crown and strike his face, lightly but symbolically, forcing the ruler to confront his own mortality and humility. If tears came, even the faintest glimmer, it was taken as a sign that Marduk had accepted the king's sincerity, and thus the nation's fortunes for the year. It is said that even the kings we now consider powerful carried a deep fear into this ritual, fear not of losing their throne, but of losing divine favor. For in Babylon, political power and religious devotion were inseparable. The strength of the state was believed to rest entirely on the harmony between king and god. If a ruler displeased Marduk, the land suffered, crops failed, armies weakened, enemies gained ground. In this belief, one can hear the heartbeat of the empire, steady when the temple thrived, faltering when it grew quiet. But history tells us that the temple of Marduk did grow quiet. The first tremor came not from enemy armies, but from within. When Nabonidus became king, he devoted himself not to Marduk, but to the moon god, Sin, a shift that caused unease among Babylonians' priests. They recorded their displeasure on clay tablets, their words subtle but unmistakable. The rituals of the Esagila were disrupted. The Akitu festival, dependent on the king's presence, faltered. The statue of Marduk remained in its chamber when it should have traveled in procession. In the silence that followed, some believed that Babylon was losing its divine anchor. The silence in the temple was not the peaceful kind. It was the heavy, unsettling quiet of something essential slipping away. When Cyrus the Great entered Babylon without battle, as the chronicles tell us,
He was quick to restore the priesthood and its rituals. The Cyrus cylinder records that he returned idols to their temples, honored the customs of the land, and presented himself not as a destroyer, but as a restorer of order. Yet even revival could not prevent the deeper truth. Babylon's place in the world had changed. Power had shifted. The rituals continued for a time, but the city was no longer the axis of an independent empire. Its gods, once the supreme figures of the Mesopotamian world, now existed within the vast, diverse pantheon of Persia. The great statue of Marduk, carried in procession for centuries, was eventually taken away, removed by Xerxes or another Persian king, whose motives remain debated. Some say it was destroyed. Others say it was transported and lost. The sources are fragmentary, the details blurred by time. But the effect was clear. Without the statue, the rituals could not be carried out in their true form. Without the rituals, the temple's spiritual pulse weakened. And without that pulse, Babylon, even as bricks, walls, and streets, lost something of its identity. In the years that followed, the Esagila fell slowly into disrepair. Not suddenly, not violently, not with a single catastrophic event, but little by little. A roof beam collapses and is not replaced. A courtyard floods and is not drained. Priests who once tended sacred fires retire or pass away, and no eager apprentices fill their place. The city's priorities shift, its population shrinks, and the once mighty temple becomes a structure that is visited, perhaps, with nostalgia or resignation rather than reverence. The silence grows deeper. And when Alexander the Great came to Babylon, centuries after Nebuchadnezzar, he is said to have been struck by the temple's condition. He ordered its restoration, planning to rebuild its great tower as well. But his life ended too soon, and the work was abandoned. The stones waited for builders who never arrived. Now, standing here in the early dawn, we face the empty ground where the Esagila once rose. No hymn drifts through the air. No priest tends a flame. No statue glitters in the dim light. Even the ziggurat's outline is difficult to trace, its bricks carried off for newer buildings by generations who no longer remembered why the place mattered. And yet, in this silence, there is something sacred. For stillness, too, can hold meaning. Absence can speak. A vanished temple can leave an imprint deeper than stone. Perhaps it is the reminder that all human structures, even those built in honor of gods, are subject to time. Perhaps it is the sense that faith, culture, and memory are more enduring than bricks, even when their physical centers have faded. Or perhaps it is simply the quiet beauty of a place where the noise of life has passed away, leaving only the soft breath of the earth. The god Marduk has no statue here now. No offerings lay before a golden figure. But the stories remain. The rituals, the festivals, the devotion of a people who believed that their God walked with them, guided them, strengthened their city. Where the past settles like dust, these stories linger. They remind us that the greatness of Babylon was not only in its walls and monuments, but in the beliefs that shaped his world. Beliefs that once gave this temple its pulse, and now give its silence its poignancy. Perhaps some answers lie only in silence. For in silence, we feel the presence of what is gone. In silence, we sense the echo of rituals once performed with trembling devotion. In silence, we understand that the fall of a city is not only the collapse of walls, but the fading of its inner life. The past returns only to those who listen gently. And when we listen here, between the ruins of the Esagila, in the cool breath of the dawn, we hear not the voice of a god, nor the chants of priests, but something far softer. The quiet truth that all sacred places, no matter how revered, eventually return to the earth. It may be that we remember only what history allows us to dream. So we dream for a moment longer, of tall
When evening settles over the plains of Mesopotamia, the light fades not abruptly, but tenderly, as though the sky is reluctant to let go of the world below. The last traces of gold stretch across the horizon, brushed thin by distance, and the air cools with a softness that feels ancient. It is in this hour, when the day exhales and the night has not yet claimed its place, that the streets of Babylon seem most alive with memory. Once, these streets carried the footsteps of thousands, merchants guiding donkeys laden with grain, priests moving in solemn lines toward the temples, artisans working beneath canopies of reed and cloth, children weaving through narrow alleys with the laughter of a city at peace. Now, the winds of time move where people once walked, picking up dust and laying it down again in thin, shifting layers. The outlines of old foundations peek through the earth, their shapes softened by centuries of drifting sand. Yet, if you look closely, you can still see where the roads once ran, long, straight, purposeful paths paved with baked brick. You can trace, in the faint rise and fall of the ground, the places where walls once rose, where doors once opened, where light once spilled across thresholds as families returned home from the riverbank. Babylon may be silent now, but its streets remember. Historians tell us that Babylon in its prime was one of the largest cities the world had ever seen, a wide expanse of humanity held together by the steady breath of the Euphrates. Its thoroughfares, such as the processional way, were lined with glazed bricks whose vibrant colors have long since dimmed, bearing lions in proud relief, guardians of the city's spirit. The streets were not merely paths from one place to another, they were the threads that stitched the fabric of daily life. Here, people bartered and sang, argued and prayed, lived and dreamed beneath the vast Mesopotamian sky. But as we walk through the remnants of these streets in imagination, there is a gentle ache to the quiet. For no city, no matter how magnificent, can resist the slow erosion of time. After the Persian conquest, Babylon remained important, a center of administration, a jewel in a wide empire, but its heartbeat grew slower. The rituals continued, but the certainty that had once filled the air grew thinner, gentler, more fragile. The city's people continued to weave their lives through its streets, but their steps carried the faint echo of change. Years passed. Empires shifted. Alexander the Great entered the city and envisioned making it the capital of his vast realm. For a moment, it seemed Babylon might rise again, its streets filled with new energy, its temples restored, its markets once more thriving with commerce. But Alexander's life ended before his plans could take root. His generals fought over his empire, dividing and reshaping the ancient world, and Babylon found itself again at the mercy of forces it did not command. Slowly, the population drifted. Some sought better opportunities in Seleucia, the new city built along the river's flow. Others moved deeper into the countryside, following the fertile fields that had sustained Mesopotamian life for millennia. The walls of Babylon remained, proud, imposing, but fewer and fewer families lived behind them. The streets, once warmed by the footsteps of thousands, felt the steady weight of solitude. It is said that abandonment does not come all at once. It comes softly, like twilight creeping into a room. A shop closes, a courtyard garden grows wild, a roof collapses in one season and is not repaired the next. Children who once learned to write cuneiform on clay tablets leave for other towns. A temple door remains shut through a festival it once opened wide for. A street, once swept clean each morning, begins to gather sand in patterns shaped by the wind. By the time centuries passed into centuries, Babylon was no longer a city of kings, but a memory of one. Travelers from distant lands wrote of its ruins, towering mounds of brick, broken walls,
fragments of inscriptions, stretches of deserted road where nothing walked but the shadows. Greek writers described the vastness of a city that no longer breathed. Later, in medieval times, visitors spoke of Babylon as a place of myth, a name whispered more than seen. What remained of the streets lay beneath layers of earth, their stories waiting for the quiet patience of archaeologists who would one day brush the dust away. And now, standing in the fading light of our own imagined dusk, we begin to understand the gentle truth that history offers us. Cities do not vanish. They settle, they soften, they return to the silence from which they were raised. If you kneel and place a hand on the soil where Babylon's streets once ran, you might feel, beneath the warmth of the earth, the faintest resonance of long-ago footsteps. Not the echo of power, not the roar of empire, but the softness of everyday life, the heartbeat of a city made by hands and hopes, by people who rose each morning and walked these paths as we walk our own. In the dust of these streets lies the essence of Babylon's legacy, not in the fall of its kings, nor the strategies of conquerors, nor the size of its walls, but in the delicate accumulation of lives lived quietly, humbly. A potter shaping clay at sunrise, a mother drawing water from a well, a scribe pressing lines into a tablet while the day grows warm, a merchant adjusting his wares as the shadows lengthen, a child learning to write the first symbol of their name. All of these moments, small and unrecorded, are held in the dust, and the dust keeps them gently, without judgment or distinction. Perhaps it is fitting that Babylon ends not in fire or fury, but in a gradual return to stillness, a quiet emptying, a soft fading, a long exhale. For an empire built along a river should end as a river does, not suddenly, but by flowing onward, its waters dispersing into other lands, other stories, other futures. Where the past settles like dust, we find not the ruins of a fallen world, but the residues of human devotion, to place, to purpose, to one another. As night completes its embrace of the ancient city, the shapes of the ruins merge into shadow. The air cools, the first stars emerge above the plain, and the streets once more fall silent. Perhaps some answers lie only in silence. Babylon's fall was not the failure of stone, nor of kings, nor of gods alone. It was simply the quiet turning of time, the gentle fading of a great city's breath, the soft settling of dust over roads that once bore the weight of 1,000 dreams. The past returns only to those who listen gently. And when we listen, we hear not the clamor of conquest, but the faint murmur of life lingering in the dust, reminding us that even the greatest empires are, in the end, collections of footsteps that fade into the evening wind. It may be that we remember only what history allows us to dream. So we dream, for a final moment, of Babylon's streets as they once were, warm with sunlight, alive with voices, echoing with laughter and prayer. Then, as the stars brighten overhead, we let the dream drift softly away, leaving behind the quiet, ancient dust that now keeps the city's last memories safe.
And so, the tale of Babylon reminds us that even the brightest civilizations fade, sometimes not in a single dramatic moment, but through quiet cracks that grow over time. Thank you for drifting through history with me tonight, here on Twilight Tale. If this journey brought you a sense of wonder or peace, feel free to like, subscribe, and join our growing circle of nighttime explorers. Until our next Twilight Tale, rest well, dream deeply, and remember, history is never truly asleep. Good night.